Thank, thank you, Denise. Yeah, I just thought about that. Okay, let me go back. Okay, so we're talking about fugitivity, right? So once you have left the plantation and you freed yourself from the plantation, right, you have to remain free because they have the dogs after you, they have the paddy rollers after you, right? They're trying to bring you back into captivity. So a component of fugitivity is also trying to remain free, right? So this is within this framework or within this notion of fugitivity. Now, coupled with fugitivity is maroonage. And this is the process of extracting oneself from slavery, right? How we could also define fugitivity, right? Relating to groups of runaways who became maroons in the swamps of the southern states of the United States and parts of enslaved territories. Also in Jamaica and the Caribbean, there's a lot of maroon societies. So what maroonage is the ability to practice a fugitivity, and you set up a community that helps you maintain your liberation, right? So I'm going to free myself from enslavement. I'm going to remain free. I'm going to set up a community or a place or a locale for other people who were able to free themselves. And we're going to fortify and protect that community and keep this community free. This is this notion of maroonage. So these are the frameworks, right? We have 5 frameworks. Each question must be answered using the frameworks. Before we move on, is there any questions that anyone has about the theoretical frameworks? I cannot emphasize enough is the importance of you guys understanding how these work. All right, so we'll move into the readings. So for the purpose of the midterm, the first reading that we'll gauge for our midterm will be the Malidoma Patrice Somé text of Water in the Spirit. The way that I set up your study guide is I pose questions, and if you're able to answer the questions, then you'll be effectively able to answer any question in the midterm as it pertains to that text, okay? And we can kind of talk through some of these questions together. What is the significance of the name in the African context? What does this mean for the author of the text, right? So what does Malidoma say about his name? And this kind of speaks to the conversation that we had in our lecture around purpose, right? And then what does this mean for the author in the text? So how does the author's name speak to his purpose, okay? So think about that. The difficulty of the English language as a means of effectively translating African occurrences. What does this mean for Somé, for the author, right? So he talks about there's some difficulties that he had trying to produce this text while using the English language, okay? So think about that, be able to expand on that difficulty. How does one's culture shape one's understanding of what can be and what is considered real, right? So in the text, Somé draws a distinction between Western culture and quote unquote primitive culture. And he says that their conceptions of real is part of that distinction. So be able to think about that. How does Somé problematize notions of primitivism and modernization? So again, think about how he uses the example of Star Trek and the experiment that he tries on his elders, right? And then what is Somé's solution to alienation produced by modernity? And this, I believe he closes the text out with this. So think about the end of the chapter as it pertains to this question. Is there any questions that you guys have about this reading of Water in the Spirit? Or the questions that are posed about this reading? All right. So we'll move on to Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Decolonizing the Mind. So the questions for this text, according to Ngugi, what is the cause of the problems in Africa, right? He has a specific claim as to what the problems of Africa are, okay? How does Ngugi understand the role of language as it pertains to shaping culture? Also another very explicit claim Ngugi makes about that. What becomes significant about the Conference of African Writers in the English Expression? So remember, he talks about there's a conference that he attended, and the only people who could attend the conference were those who wrote in English languages, right? And he says it's a vast contradiction because someone who is A world-renowned poet or world-renowned author who writes in African languages would not be able to attend the conference, while Ngugi himself, a graduate student who's only published a few articles, was able to attend the conference, okay? Um, according to Ngugi, what according to Ngugi is the impetus of the physical and spiritual subjugation. So another claim that Ngugi makes, and there's a distinction that's drawn between what subjugates the physical, the body, and then what subjugates the spirit, right? So be attentive to what that distinction is. Are there any questions about decolonizing the mind? Okay. We'll move on to Glissant, Poetics of Relation. How does the juxtaposition of the written and the oral manifest according to Glissant? So again, think about the opening page of the open book text. At the bottom of the page in the endnotes, he draws the juxtaposition between the written and the oral. So be familiar with that. Why is the open boat symbolic? What is Glissant provoking his readers to envision? What is the significance of the belly of the boat being pregnant? Okay, so think about that. We talked about this quite extensively in the lecture. Also, the three metamorphoses of the abyss. This is another thing that we talked about quite extensively, in our lecture. And then the question of why is Glissant so attentive to relation? Again, the text is entitled Poetics of Relation. Why does relations become important for Glissant? Think about the conversation that we had around creolization, the conversation that we had around gumbo, right? When you think about these notions of relation. Is there any questions you guys have about Glissant, Poetics of Relation? You guys good? All right. So we'll move to Hurston's of Mules of Men. Remember, this is the folklore text. What is the significance of folklore as it pertains to the African oral tradition, right? Remember thinking about folklore as it pertains to funds of knowledge, the framework that probably closest fits this text. How does Hurston articulate acts of subversion? Think about the story of the bear, the lion, and the man. How is the griot personified in Of Mules and Men, right? Think about the role of the elders. Which theoretical framework best suits Hurston's project? And I already gave you that, right? So that would be obviously funds of knowledge, okay? Any questions about Of Mules and Men? Okay, so on here, I only have Going to Meet the Man from Baldwin, but we also read The Fire Next Time. So don't neglect or do not think about that text, right? So we may have some questions about that on the midterm also. But for Going to Meet the Man, as well as Fire Next Time, right? What are Baldwin's pillars of white inferiority? Remember I said this maintenance of white innocence and the white imagination, but not only know what they are, but know how they work, right? Be able to explain and articulate them. What does Baldwin do with the multiple interpretations of the Negro spiritual? So think about the main character, Jesse. Think about the songs he kept hearing in his head, right? So what is Baldwin doing with those songs? Be familiar with that. What does the dynamics between Jesse and Otis say about raising Black children juxtaposed to raising white children? So think about how Jesse was always looking to go to Otis when he had questions about racial dynamics. So what does that say about having to raise Black children juxtaposed to having to raise white children? What is the historical significance of the picnic, and how does this relate to Baldwin's story? So you guys should be able to kind of interpret what that means. How does epigenetics fit in Baldwin's critique of society? So remember, epigenetics is the process of passing trauma down from one generation to the next generation via DNA, right? So how does epigenetics, this science, pertain to Baldwin's critique of society in the text Going to Meet the Man? So these will be the readings that you'll be engaging for your midterm. Is there any questions about any of these readings? Okay, one second. Okay. So another thing that we did in the other classes, students try to situate frameworks within the readings, right? So we already did that with of Mules and Men. We know that this text speaks most closely to funds of knowledge. If you guys want to, it's totally up to you. We could do this with the other readings to give you a better understanding of how the theoretical frameworks work. If you guys feel cool with that, if you feel comfortable with the theoretical frameworks, we can move on. All right, so I'm assuming y'all good with the theoretical framework. Again, I cannot overemphasize. 9 times out of 10, when people miss points on these midterms, it's because they're not using the theoretical framework. So I want to make sure that you guys feel comfortable. So take advantage of this opportunity. All right, bet.
Can we go over them?
You want to? So do you want to go over the frameworks or try to match the frameworks to a reading?
Yeah, trying to match them to the readings.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with the first one of water and spirit. Another thing I'll say about the frameworks, right? It's very plausible that multiple frameworks fit one reading. It's really about how you're going to articulate why they fit together. Does that make sense? So it could, for example, for this of water and spirit, it could be fugitivity and maroonage, but it's going to be about me being able to articulate why it's fugitivity and why it's maroonage. Okay, so don't think about if we have one, then that's the only one. There could be multiple frameworks. So if we're thinking about a water and the spirit, what framework do you feel fits best? African American male theory, critical race theories framework, counter storytelling, funds of knowledge, or maroonage or fugitivity? Which do you feel best works with this text? Anybody can answer.
Um, for me, I feel as though counter storytelling could fit into it, and that's only because he's very in touch with his culture and listens to his elders. So I think when he goes back to visit his elders and introduces them to Star Trek and like experimenting and all of that, it could be then related into how his elders passed on information to him and told him about stuff. But then at the same time, it could also be fugit. Oh, I can't pronounce it. Fugit.
Fugitivity.
Yeah, that. Okay, so it could be that because he's kind of like stepping a little bit outside of his normal comfort zone, I could say, and he's taking that back to his elders and introducing them to that, so it's kind of like expanding their knowledge and like giving them something new in a way.
Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right, Angelica. It definitely could be counter storytelling or fugitivity. Um, but just to kind of refine how you're articulating both fugitivity and counter storytelling. From a counter storytelling standpoint, right? It would fit closer within counter storytelling because he's not telling a story from the Jesuit priest who stole him, right? And put him into captivity. He's telling the story from the colonized who was captured and placed into captivity. So that would make it more of a counter storytelling narrative. From the standpoint of fugitivity, that would really come into play when he ran away from the priest and when he ran away from the seminary. That would make that more of a fugitivity because he's escaping, right, from the captivity that the priest placed him in. But you're not wrong, right? It's really about how you articulate why they connect. What other frameworks could fit within this text? First of all, Angelica, does that make sense as far as the distinction that I made?
Yeah.
Okay. So what other frameworks could fit with of water in the spirit? We have at least 3 more.
I thought that maybe one of them could be the African American male theory, because I think that I don't remember exactly the name of the character, but I
Maladoma.
know that he is strong and resilient because, you know, even though like he was captured and taken from his home and his culture, he had the strength to escape, and he actually, you know, he went back to his family and back to where he was born, where he was from, and he kind of like transitioned back into his culture.
Absolutely. Yes, a good call out, Natalia. Absolutely. Did anybody think about funds of knowledge?
I did, but I didn't know exactly how to explain it.
Yeah, I think that's another one. And think about the information that Maladoma has, right? Think about how Maladoma was able to make it through college. Think about how Maladoma was able to get into college, right? Think about his talesmen. That's funds of knowledge. Think about the magic that he got from his elders to help him read the answer to his midterm on his professor's face, right? That's a quintessential example of a funds of knowledge. Knowledge that's passed down from one generation to the next, that's not widely recognized in dominant society. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's move into decolonizing the mind. So what framework do you think would fit for decolonizing the mind? And again, it could be multiple frameworks. We got counter storytelling, we have African American male theory, we have funds of knowledge, we have maroonage, we have fugitivity. Which one do you think fits best? Or what question can you pose to help you think about which one would fit best?
When I look at the third question, funds of knowledge comes to mind.
Funds of knowledge?
Yeah. And the reason is I feel like I'm trying to think back to the reading. I remember how it talks about how it changes it to like the English language because like there's certain things that they couldn't say in their original language.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like they're trying to pass it down through their story.
Yeah, that could definitely work. So if you think about the thesis of this text, right, it was to situate the importance of indigenous languages, right? To talk about the importance of African writers writing African languages. So what Ishau was saying is that language within itself is a funds of knowledge, right? That's absolutely correct. Is there another framework that could fit within this text? How could African American male theory fit for this text? So what does the framework African American male theory state?
It states African American boys and men are resilient and resistant. African American male theory posits that African American men and boys are born with an innate desire for self-determination and with an unlimited capacity for morality and intelligence.
So think about again the thesis of Ngugi's argument, right? That African thinkers should use African languages to express themselves. That is a form of self-determination, right? Do you understand? Does everybody understand what self-determination means? Or does anybody not understand what self-determination means? So everybody gets what self-determination means. So in Ngugi asserting the importance of African languages, that reflects self-determination, right? This also echoes an unlimited capacity for brilliance. He put together a whole damn book about the importance of the African language, right? So that speaks to his intelligence, right? African American male theories is one of those frameworks that could damn near fit in any answer, right? It's just really going to be about your ability to articulate why it works. Let's do one more. Do y'all want to do the Baldwin one, or do you want to do Glissant? I think Baldwin's more recent. We read that a couple weeks ago. So let's do Baldwin. What framework will we situate Going to Meet the Man? So this is a story. So this also can have some insight as to what framework this would pertain to. This is a short story. So who's the protagonist of this story? Who's the main character?
Jesse?
Jesse, okay. So what is Jesse's ethnic background?
He's white.
Okay. So what position is this narrative being told from?
From a white man's point of view.
So that's the point of view of the dominant culture, right? So would this be a counter storytelling framework?
I would say no, because he's white, so it's since it is the dominant group, it's not really counter storytelling.
Right. So so we know it's not going to be counter storytelling. Can funds of knowledge work for elements of Going to Meet the Man?
Well, I think
It
that would
would.
fit in when, like, relating to Jesse and to Otis, because Jesse had to go to Otis, like when he was in search of answers, like specifically relating to race.
Yep, exactly. And then not to mention also the funds of knowledge that Jesse received by going to the picnic, right? That was another form of knowledge, okay? But you're absolutely right. That probably be what the best situated framework for this text would be, funds of knowledge. And then also, of course, African-American male theory would work for this as well. So familiarize yourself with these frameworks. If you guys do have further questions about the frameworks, don't hesitate to shoot me an email, shoot me a text. Just remember that you're going to have to answer your questions using these frameworks. Okay, another thing that people missed points for in the past was not answering the question completely, right? So a question may sound like this: how old are African people? Name for me a significant African individual prior to European contact, and why does this information become important in the world of academia, right? So that's one question, but within that one question, there's 3 different sub-questions. So to receive full points, you would have to answer each of those sub-questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so that not answering the questions completely and then not using a theoretical framework to answer the questions causes people to lose points. So to provide you an example of how to use a theoretical framework to answer the question, So well, I'll answer the same question that I posed. How old are African people? Name for me an African individual prior to European contact, and why that individual is important, and why does this information become important in the world of academia, right? So using a African American male theory framework, I know African people can be traced back 8 million years old. A significant African individual prior to European contact is Imhotep, because he was the world's first multi-genius, also a physician, scribe, and builder of the first step pyramids. This information becomes important in the world of academia through a African-American male theory framework, because it situates the innate brilliance and capacity for self-determination within African people who can be traced back to being the first people on the planet, right? So you see from that answer, I answered every component of that question, and I worked that component, or I worked my answer through a theoretical framework of African-American male theory. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So you'll have 5 questions. You'll only have to answer 3 of the 5 questions. But again, read the questions thoroughly so you can answer the questions in their entirety, and make sure that you're using a theoretical framework. The journals, sorry, not the journals, the midterms will be due, 1 second. I believe, yes, the 13th of April, by midnight, before midnight. And then you also want to submit your journals with your midterm. I'm going to pull up our Google Classroom site, and we'll go through how many journal entries you should have. And then I'll answer any other questions that you guys have about either the midterms, the journals, or anything else. Get some stuff away. All right. So from weeks 1 through 3, we have the teaching of Ptah Hotep. That's 1 reading. And then we have the Ma'at readings. So that's 2 readings in your journals for weeks 1 through 3. For weeks 4 through 7, we have Sommeil of Water and Spirit. We have Ngugi, Decolonizing the Mind. And we have Glissant, Poetics of Relation. So that would be 5 total for your journal entry. For weeks 8 through 11, we have Hurston's Mules and Men. We have Baldwin's Going to Meet the Man, and then we have Baldwin's Fire Next Time, Letter to My Nephew. So that should give us 8 total journal entries for the semester. Does that sound about right to you guys?
Yes.
Okay, bet. So you'll have till April 13th to submit the midterm here, 12 p.m. I'm sorry, 12 midnight to submit that. And then also you'll submit your journals as well. So the first one there, April 13th by 12 midnight. With the journals, if you handwritten the journals out, you should either take a picture of them or do something to make sure you're able to submit them electronic file, because you won't be able to submit a handwritten journal without making it electronic. Okay. Is there any other questions that you guys have about your journals? Okay. So for, I'm not going to assign any readings or any material for this week, because I want you to solely focus on your midterm. But for next week's class, when we meet next Wednesday, we will be going over what groups you'll be going into for our final projects, okay? Actually, let me just read one more time. So for your final projects, you will pick a song from one of these songs here. Based on what song you select will determine what group you'll be in. and then you'll be tasked to put together a project to report back on your interpretation of the song. But that's what we'll be doing next week. If you can, try to listen to the songs before next week. That will save us some time. But if everybody has not listened to the songs, then I'll play them through next week, and then I'll have you guys choose what groups you'll be in, and then that way you can start cultivating and crafting your projects. All right, that's all I have for y'all. Do you have any questions for me about anything thus far in the semester? All right, so one question I have for you. Now that we've gone through the midterm review, how do you feel about the midterm? You feel prepared? You feel nervous? You feel apprehensive? How do you feel about stepping this midterm this weekend?
I feel prepared. I know that I have to study a bit more.
Yeah, I would say above anything, just don't wait to the last minute, right? Like I gave you damn near 5 days to do it. So take advantage of the time that you have, because you want to be able to familiarize yourself with the frameworks for one, right? And then be able to take time to write a comprehensive response to the question. So don't wait to the last minute. Even if you do like a question a day, at least give yourself the time to be able to effectively and completely answer those questions. Other than that, the midterms will be emailed out to you guys tomorrow. They'll also be available on Google Classroom site tomorrow as well. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to holler at me. Any other questions before I let you guys out? All right, y'all was hella more quiet than the last classes. So I hope you feel good with the material, and I hope you feel prepared. Don't stress off of it. It's not meant to be a stressful experience. You are prepared for it. You covered the material. I sat in classes with you. I heard you guys engaged in material and grapple with it. So just be confident in that process. And again, if you have any questions, holler at me, and I'll do the best I can to resolve your issues, right? All right, be safe, be healthy, be well, and I will see you next week.